Very warm welcome to all of you. My thanks to Jaivir and Avatar Foundation for this opportunity. I would also like to thank Patricia and Alliance Francaise for generously providing us with the space. My thanks to Harini for her research and for creating the PowerPoint presentation. She also assisted with the research and presentation for the previous two lectures. So I want to thank her again for that. And of course, my heartfelt thanks to all of you for being here today. Thanks. Maybe just have a look at the picture. It is the title is called Receivers and Givers and Receivers. So they are all the students of Rai Chowdhury, and in turn they all become teachers, and then their students again become teachers. So this is like a sort of a cycle. One in the center is Panikar with his wife. The dark shirt is Dhanapal, and next to him is Ram Gopal. And seated at the extreme left is Krishna Rao. Just above him is Santan Raj. You have Munuswamy near him, and then Anthony Das. So we are all, teacher, student. Again, and then they all become teachers. The other two, I'm not sure who they are. So, just for an understanding of the picture. Today, I'm focusing on the period from the 1930s to 50s. I'll present seven artists: Panikar, Dhanapal, Krishna Rao, Mukaya, Perumal, Santan Raj, Munuswamy, and Pradosh Das Gupta and Dashrath Patel. But with the focus being the first two, Panikar and Dhanapal. I consider myself a skeptical person, often suspended between belief and disbelief, Shakespearean ambivalence. What propels and defines me are the persistent, unresolved questions. I believe artist's role is to question, to redefine established notions. This leads to a fundamental inquiry. What is art and what is its role? How do I see other artists and what importance do they hold for me? And why do they become central to my own artistic existence? How is artistry to be located? Do artists work in isolation, only to be retrospectively framed together by historians? Or do artists themselves participate in imagining and shaping artistry? The idea for this lecture series is rooted in the understanding of history as the glue that binds us all. While I was assigning titles to each lecture, I instinctively named this one Receivers and Givers, drawing on the concept of students who later become teachers and whose own student in turn become teachers, and this suggests a cyclical process of transmission and renewal. The Sangam poets offer a compelling example. Over 600 poets, writing across a span of 300 years, were thinking and feeling in one breath and becoming one body or corpus. They are distinct individuals living in different locations and time, shaped by their social milieu. They were writing from their experience of people around them, the human feeling of their lived lives. Yet they wrote in a common tongue, sharing the efficacy of a language to articulate love, valor, virtue in specificity of landscape, time, and things in a poetic form. How is such collective voice possible without one poet, in some sense, living through the life of another? A.K. Ramanujam describes this phenomenon as the debt of a poet to a poet. In Bhakti tradition, this debt, extending poet to poet and from century to century, becomes even more pronounced and culminates in monumental collective works such as Nalayara Divya Prabandham and Tirumarai. Yet this raises in me a provocative question. Were these poets truly in love with God, or were they in love with the words and voices of their fellow poets? Perhaps the divine was a pretext for a dialogue between the poets across time. From this perspective, artistic creation is rarely, if ever, an isolated act. It is through a state of communion between an artist and their contemporaries, as well as with the artist of the past, that truly a language and meaning evolves. In the fluid and often uncertain terrain of art making, this continuity of dialogue becomes the only stable ground upon which artistic practice can meaningfully stand. In the previous lecture, I discussed Roy Chowdhury's dilemma, which may be understood in three parts. The blind imitation of idealized model from the past. This refers to the willful belief in a hallowed past in which artists were thought to have perfected a mode of aesthetics that required only faithful adherence without any critical engagement. Second, realism reduced to a mere technical skill. Here, the transformation of retinal impressions onto a surface, whether paper, canvas, or clay, through practice and innate ability, came to be regarded as mere duplication of perpetual reality. Such repetition, favored for its conventional appeal and ease of praise, was seen as superficial. The artist's role was to transcend this surface imitation and seek deeper truths. Third one, the modernistic experimentation disconnected from social realities. Modernism in India did not emerge organically. It was introduced during the colonial period. Cultural nationalism arose in response to Western hegemony. But after independence, India became more receptive to Western ideas, viewing them as progressive. Yet there was always a countercurrent to this narrative. As a result, taking cues from Western modern art movements and reproducing them without the context or purpose often made it appear more like a pretense than a genuine development. These questions remained relevant and continued to be discussed at the Madras Art School even during my time as a student in the 1990s. In retrospect, I see how these three primary concerns have shaped generations of artists at the Madras Art School. It is evident from their works that they were conscious there was a conscious effort to develop a visual language that did not fall into any of these three typecasts. Raichaudhuri model of empirical inquiry offered one response to this challenge. He emphasized the importance of direct observation and drawing from life, cultivating students who became prodigious draftsmen, and this approach fostered acute awareness and empathy for one's immediate surroundings, fellow beings, animals, and even inanimate objects. Such observational discipline and strong skills served two crucial purposes. They enabled artists to respond to visible reality with precision, and they encouraged a turning of the outward gaze inwards. This inward turn offered the insight, wisdom, and strength to reflect on one's inner life. Rajchaudhuri phrases it as ability to withstand the charge of truth and sincerity. Across the artists of the Madras Art School, we see remarkable draftsmanship, acute observational ability, and distinct inward gaze. Their artistic expression emerged from an internalization of the subject, a feeling of being one with a feeling of being one with it, even becoming the subject itself. Their work appeal not only to our intellect but also to our senses. What they draw from the viewer is a bodily response, and one can feel it in the body. See this as connected to the South Indian tradition of art making. We can trace this quality not only in our sculptural and pictorial traditions, but also in our literary heritage. Standing before an Ardhanarishwara sculpture, for example, what is communicated is not merely the concept of union of the male and the female. It becomes a bodily experience. We realize through our body the inseparable and interconnected principle of the masculine and the feminine. Such an experience is possible only when the artist is able to internalize the subject, when he or she, in a sense, becomes Ardhanarishwara to express it in a plastic form. It is then that the sculpture becomes a living presence. I would like to take two poems, one from the Sangam period and one from the Bhakti period, to show how careful observation, awareness, and internalization of the subject connect 20th century modern art with South Indian artistic tradition. These poems, like Ardhanarishwarat sculpture, shows that art here has long focused not only on the outer form, but, but on embodying an inner experience that speaks to both the senses and the mind. Placing these poems alongside the works of the Madras Art School highlights this shared inward gaze and attentive observation. Sangam poem by Perum Pattumanar. This bowman has a warrior band on his ankle. The girl with the bracelet on her arm has a virgin's anklet on her tender feet. They look like good people. In these places, the wind beat upon the wagai trees and make the white seed pods rattle, like drums for acrobats dancing on the tightropes. Poor things, who could they be? And what makes them walk with all the others through these desert ways so filled with bamboos? The poem reveals precise observation and a keen awareness of the couple's condition. The poet's empathy transforms the scene, the desert part, the rattling wagai trees, and the drum like seed pods into a vivid lived experience that draws the reader into the perils of the couple's journey. The 9th century Bhakti poem by Nammalwar. My dark one stands there as if nothing changed after taking the entire into his mob. All three worlds, the gods and the good kings who hold their lands as mother would a child in her womb. And I, by having his leave, have taken him entire. I have him in my belly for keeps. Here, the divine is not depicted as an external, all pervading entity. Instead, God is consumed and internalized. The devotee's body becomes the dwelling place of the divine and is thereby rendered sacred. This illustrates the principle of internalization seen in South Indian artistic tradition, where the subject is embodied rather than merely represented. Roy Chowdhury's negation of rigid ideologies lifted the shackles that might have constrained his students. The liberated atmosphere and fertile ground he fostered, as critic Joseph James observed, created in a short time an exceptional large number of exceptional artists from among his students. Among his foremost people was Cassius Panikkar, who could be described as both a student's student and a teacher's teacher. In this lecture, I'll focus on Panikkar's early works spanning the 1940s to the 50s. I intend to discuss his pedagogy and his later series such as Words and Symbols in the next lecture as part of the Madras Art Movement. Panikkar was 25 when he joined the Madras Art School in 1936, a choice that was at the time an anomaly, well beyond the typical age for a student. Something compelling, a deep conviction drove him to take the life altering decision to become an artist. In his essay, Why Do I Paint? He recalls his childhood as being haunted by the imagination of a sense of deficiency. He felt that if left alone, unobserved, he might be able to do something beyond the capacity of most. While at school, a new boy joined the class, one with a precocious talent for painting. And this encounter helped Panikar to open his eye to art. He began to draw pictures of villages and coconut roofs he knew well from his native Kerala. He writes of being specially moved by canals, which stirred him so deeply that his eyes would fill with tears. He could immerse completely in the act of painting. Panikkar describes gaining strength steadily in pursuit of a well defined goal. Yet once the goal was reached, it was often challenged and replaced. He says, I began to feel that the heaven which I had built for my own self was transient and insubstantial. And when I woke up from my dream, I felt sure of one thing: I had to build a new, different world. The shifting of goals occurred at least 4 times during my career. Though the goal kept changing, the emotional response from painting remained the same. The self portrait. Realism is a maya, an illusion and reflection of a transient world. In his 1938 self portrait, Panikkar refuses to be deceived by the outward appearance or the phenomena of the material world. He pierces the veil of realism, turning the work into a probing introspection of the self, a remarkable feat so early in his career. A luminous light illuminates the background, casting a long shadow across his face. He does not face the light but turns deliberately away from it. The absence of the eyes startles the viewer. The very eyes, the windows to both the inner and the outer worlds, are rendered void. The more we look at him, attempting to seize him in flesh and spirit, the more we realize, through a reversal of roles, that it is he who gazes at us, and we stand there naked in our own presence and our gaze turned inwards. watercolor landscape from 1943 to 1945. Panikkar revisits the places of his childhood. Unlike his earlier works made before art school, these are not driven by nostalgia. Rather, they reveal a learned approach, an attempt to redo the past. He brings into practice three key elements: keen observation, an identification with his native landscape, and a modernist approach to pictorial space. Post Impressionist art has had a profound influence on artists worldwide. Cezanne paintings, in particular, embodied in a statement that every brushstroke has its own perspective, a principle that dismantled the hierarchical order of Western world. For nearly 500 years, from Renaissance to 19th century realism, the canvas had been conceived as an empty space to be filled with forms arranged in a receding order. The Impressionists broke from this tradition by treating the canvas as a surface, drawing attention to its materiality. In doing so, they implied that the painted image was mere representation rather than a testament to an irrefutable truth, as traditional painting had promised. The open forms of post Impressionists further blurred the distinction between figure and ground, allowing every part of the picture to contribute to the cohesion of the whole. This historical shift unlocked enormous possibilities for succeeding generations of artists. Panikkar's watercolor landscapes display an understanding of open forms. Like conventional landscape painting, unlike the conventional landscape painting, there's no hierarchy. Everything has its place in the scheme of things here. The foreground, background, light, shadow, color, and tone holds equal importance. Each element exists in the precise plan of the artist. He transforms observation into experience, capturing the exact moment when the material transforms into image. Yet these are not experiments in modernist ideas. He works with seriousness and earnestness to bring life to the vision before him, without losing the emotional appeal it holds for him. These works offer a prelude to his later works. Tamil modern consciousness was taking shape in the poetry of Bharatiya's Vasana Kavidai. In 1934, Manikudi began publishing, introducing modernist literary styles and themes to the public sphere. C. Virudachalam, whose pen name Pudumai Pittan, meaning crazy about newness or modernity, emerged as the literary icon of the Manikudi period. His short stories were written in terse prose, often employing regional dialects and depicting small time characters living their ordinary lives, seemingly unaware of the quiet profundity of their existence and historical moment. Meanwhile, Tamil cinema was shedding its entanglement with mythological narratives and nationalist fervor, entering a modernist phase in the late 1940s. It was in this spirit of the times that Panikkar founded the Progressive Painters Association in 1944, just a year after the formation of Calcutta Group in 1943. Paritosh Sen, Panikkar's classmate at the Madras Art School, was one of the Calcutta Group's founding members, along with Pradosh Das Gupta, also a former student of the Madras School. Though little is known about the manifesto of the progressive painters, it can be assumed that, like the Calcutta Group, they too advocated for art created within an international context. Payment dwellers after the war, 1950-51. These paintings represent some of Panikkar's most expressive and psychologically charged works. It was his attempt at the grotesque, a response to the aftermath of the Second World War, which left in its wake not only widespread death and destruction, but also the depth of human depravity and bestiality. Payment dwellers became a representation of those who are pushed to the margins, deprived of home, food, and clothing. Stripped of their sense of self and humanity, what remains is a visceral mockery of madness. The painting stands as a witness to the loss of civilization. These large, almost life size compositions push the figure to the foreground, creating a compressed, claustrophobic pictorial space. The viewer is compelled to confront the scene without the possibility of turning away, drawn into it into an uneasy participation. These paintings act upon the senses. Poverty here is not merely seen but felt. its texture palpable, and its stench almost perceptible. Christ and Lazarus, painted in 1950. Panikkar seems to seek answers to the afflictions of human existence through the historical and spiritual figures of Christ and Buddha. The painting depicts the biblical story of Jesus bringing Lazarus back to life, a narrative that prefigures Christ's own resurrection. It stands not only as one of the most significant iconographies in Christian art, but also as a universal symbol of renewal. For Panikkar, art, like religion, is an act of faith, a belief in its power to rise from the ashes as an affirmation of life. Panikkar, both in his works and his writings, acknowledged his indebtedness to the masters of Western art. This painting, with its study of human anatomy, perspective, and the foreshortening of forms, along with the use of light and shadow, reveals a scientific temperament. Yet, within this rational framework, he achieves a simultaneity of reason and mystical experience, a unification of analytical observation and spiritual insight. Blessed are the Peacemakers. It's painted in 1951. It is Panikkar's most ambitious work, both in theme and scale. Contemporary in spirit and comparable to Binod Bihari Mukherjee's Lives of Medieval Saints, the mural painting in the Hindi Bhavan at Shantiniketan. Lives of Medieval Saints stands as the grand apotheosis of the Bengal revivalism, imposing in conception, scale, and execution. It depicts the lives and teachings of a diverse group of medieval saint poets, reflecting a rich syncretic tradition. Panikkar's Blessed or the Peacemakers share a similar concern. The title refers to one of the eight Beatitudes from the Gospel of Matthew, part of the Sermon on the Mount. This painting depicts uh, Christ, Buddha, and Gandhi as peacemakers who bring compassion and solace to the world. They preach nonviolence and forgiveness in the face of wrath and vengeance. Both Panikkar and Mukherjee arrive at the same spiritual resolution, though through different artistic understanding and practices, revealing both divergence and convergence in their approaches. Bengal revivalism turned to Eastern tradition as a spiritual response to the materialistic tendencies of the West. The revivalist pedagogy was not based on rigid frameworks. They believed in effortless and free flow of assimilating knowledge, striving for a personal enlightenment, much like the Eastern masters. In contrast, the pedagogy of the Madras School of Art relied on a more scientific method, learning through a structured and progressive curriculum from year to year. Through years of rigorous training, and students become increasingly competent. The near obsessive emphasis on correctness of drawing, composition, and material handling became defining characteristics of the Madras School. Panikkar's work has a feel of an early Renaissance painting, where religious vision is filtered through the light of science. In Indian fresco traditions, red ochre was often used to define the contours of figures after the initial sketch was complete. Final lines were drawn in deep red or brown, with artists remaining open to revisions and modification. Panikkar's use of red ochre to delineate human figures and his visible process of drawing and redrawing serves as an acknowledgement of the Indian traditional painting practice. The painting becomes a meeting place of the formalism of Western art and the metaphysical vision of the East. Lumbini, 1953. Panikkar writes, during the early 1950s, I began to feel dissatisfied with the Western influence which had been my mainstay. From then on, between 1953 and 63, I was under the influence of combination of Ajanta and Van Gogh. The series of drawings and paintings he began in 1953 mark a decisive shift, a search for a visual language that was Indian yet contemporary and relevant. The bewitching non-linear visual storytelling of the Ajanta murals has long been a wellspring of inspiration for Indian artists seeking a nativist grounding in their work. The murals of Ajanta are not sequential narratives. The story of the Bodhisattva are not bound to earthly space, but unfold before the viewer like a vision. Lumini, like the Ajanta paintings, is free of gravity. The vertical and horizontal lines that structured Panikar's early works dissolve into a fluid, floating pictorial field. The focus shifts from anatomical precision and compositional order to the work's expressive truth. The paintings depicts renunciation, realization, and Buddhahood, not only tracing the life of Buddha, but also reflecting Panikar's own artistic progress, his long earning pursuit of reaching beyond the capacity of most. Dhanapal, like Panikar, played a seminal role in shaping the Madras Art School discourse, contributing significantly to its growth both as an artist and as a teacher. For more than 1,000 years in Tamil Nadu, the temple served as the nucleus around which the lives of kings, merchants, artisans, agrarian landowners, peasants, and the most marginalized workers revolved. It represented a theocratic form of governance, with the presiding deity of the temple regarded as the nominal ruler. Dhanapal, born in Mylapore, a temple town in Madras, was native to this cultural atmosphere. Within its maze of lanes lived sthapatis, musicians, dancers, weavers, silversmiths, garland makers, and potters, an entire social organization devoted to the service of the temple. Dhanapal's early exposure to art came through these craftsmen and their practices, the idol makers and weavers and potters of Mylapore. He also trained for some time in the traditional painting method. It must have been a radically different and challenging world for Dhanapal when he entered the Madras Art School as a student in 1936. The situation was not unique to him. Most students from Tamil Nadu came from towns and villages shaped by a similar cultural milieu. The Madras Art School offered an alternate vision, one that departed from traditional structures. In the traditional system, each person acted within a defined role, bound by hereditary or communal functions. In contrast, the art school ecosystem encouraged independent thought and individual expression, empowering students to think and act on their own accord. This shift created a deep predicament for many of them, leaving two paths to choose from. One was to deny and retreat into the comforts of the old world, where one's position and role was secure. The other, far more difficult, to be modern and to recognize oneself as a sovereign individual and accept the reality of a new world that demanded the courage to cut ties and emerge as a new person. Such a person needed the strength, knowledge, and will to ask fundamental questions and act upon them, an act that alone could lead to true change and progress. The birth of modern man or woman is important to discuss in relation to the notion of Suyamaryadai or self respect within Tamil Nadu's socio political context. Suyamaryadai, a social reform movement founded by Periyar in 1925, centered on the liberation of the individual. It asserted that the true freedom arises only when a person recognizes that dignity is inherent to all human beings, and that alone must possess and that one must possess the liberty to think, to feel, and to shape one's own destiny, demanding an equal place in society. At its core, the movement affirmed equality across gender, caste, and class. The political dialogue of the time must have deeply informed Dhanapal's outlook. Needless to say, Dhanapal took the later path. Fine art institutions are among the most democratic of spaces. The Madras Art School must have been a meeting ground for many ideas. To truly engage with new ways of thinking, unlearning becomes an essential tool. To unlearn does not mean to disown. It is an act of letting go of preconceptions while retaining certain insights inculcated by one's cultural environment. Dhanapal's primary training was in painting. His classmates included Panikar, Paritosh Sen, Sushil Mukherjee, and Gopal Ghosh, an intellectually stimulating circle. During his formative years, he showed equal interest in Bengal revivalists and in modern art movements. The works of Nandalal Bose, in particular, with their simplicity in interpreting traditional forms, felt both close to him and readily accessible. Dhanapal remarked that they opened me out into a contemporary school of drawing. Unlike the West, India, like many other third world countries, did not experience a fractured relationship between tradition and modernity. Instead, the two coexisted, constantly addressing and altering each other's position. For Dhanapal, the Chitrakulam streets of Mylapore offered tradition as a lived reality. He said, at the best moment of my life and work, I did not find tradition and modernity has two different kinds of perceptions opposed to each other. He further reflected, when I think about it now, I perceive a oneness and continuity. Thus, in his works, we find a fine weaving of both polarities, the warp and weft seamlessly blending to create a delicate fabric that reveals a syncretism as the essence of living. I would like to take these two drawings as an example to illustrate my point. One is a life study of a model, the other is a creative drawing produced around the same time. Interestingly, the supple and modulating lines of the model study appears traditional, while the traditional works look more contemporary. Dhanapal's move to sculpture was not sudden. As a student of Pallava and Chola sculptures, he intuitively understood that volume is shaped by the edges that delineate it from space. The genius of the Pallava and Chola sculptors lay in perceiving drawing as a principle that gives material to its form. Dhanapal's drawings, already infused with a sense of volume, enabled him to transition into sculpture effortlessly. Dhanapal closely followed Roy Chowdhury's life studies, while Roy Chowdhury focused on capturing the character and the physical presence of the model with swiftness and raw energy. Dhanapal's studies reveal a marked difference. Though they retain his teacher's perceptive insight, they are gentler in tone and application. The physicality of bone, flesh, and skin recedes into the background, becoming an invisible presence. The portrait, in a subtle way, refers to the Indian tradition in which the spirit is given primacy over the body. These are visual political historiographies. Dhanapal was constantly looking for new routes that would add to his artistic experience. His interest extended to music, dance, literature, film, and politics, through which he recognized the interconnectedness of different streams of thought. This awareness opened pathways for engagement with other disciplines and ideas, not only for himself but also for those who followed him. Poet Bharatidasan, actor N.S. Krishnan, communist leader Jivanandam were his intimate friends. This led to a series of interesting portraits. Some commissioned works and others were made on his own accord. Except for Gandhi and Nehru, all other sculptures are done from life. These sculptures become important visual political historiographies of their time, chroni- chronicling the figures and forces that defined Tamil Nadu's emerging modern identity. The omnipresent folk deities of Tamil Nadu, guardians of clans and villages, are at once terrifying and reassuring. While classical art is elevated and often inaccessible to the common people, folk art remains participatory and accessible, allowing for continuous change according to place, need, and taste. It stands at the center of Tamil's cultural psyche. The hollowed out interiors, the burnt earth colors, and the tactile quality of terracotta figurines gave Dhanapal both technique and expressiveness he sought to further his cultural ideas. The use of wide, open eyes in his works evoke a continuum that runs from Sumerian perpetual worshippers to the watchful protectors like Karupasamy and Nayanar. It's made in 1958. The sculpture depicts one of the 14 stations of the cross. It carries the gravity of a Byzantine icon painting, the lightness of Oriental art, and the modernist compositional structure of volume, rhythm, and space, expressed with the sincerity and faith of a folk artist. The work holds multiple layers of reference. The empty space between the figures and the minimal detailing except for the faces lend it a sense of being perpetually in progress. Dhanapal leaves room for the viewer to complete the sculpture through their own imagination, establishing a reciprocity of trust between the artist and the audience. Avaya, this was made in 1960, and Avayar is not the name of a single individual. Rather, there are at least three historical recorded figures known by the title. The term Avayar carries layered meaning: mother, elderly woman, and ascetic. She is believed to have belonged to the class of wandering minstrels. Beyond literary references, however, there exists no established iconography for Avayar. Unlike the poetess of Bhakti period, such as Karikal Ammayar and Andal, who possesses well recognized visual representations, Dhanapal was not drawing from existing models or imagery. Instead, he sought to create an iconography for Avayar entirely from his imagination. Avayar is perhaps the most secular figure in Tamil cultural memory. She represents old age, femininity, and poetry, the three attributes that carry the healing power of truth and wisdom. This sculpture also marked the conclusion of a figurative phase in Dhanapal's practice. Over the preceding 2 decades, he had resolved the dilemmas and conflict between tradition and modernism, observing diverse influences while remaining centered in his cultural location. In doing so, he created a liberated space and a reference point for others who followed him. Krishna Rao. Krishna Rao was a contemporary of Dhanapal and Panikkar. He served as a teacher and later as the principal of the Madras School of Arts from 1968 to 71. A native of Madurai, in early years he lived near the Meenakshi Amman temple. In his watercolors, he evokes the memories of his proximity to the temple's towering gopurams, the monumental gateways that mark the 4 cardinal entrances leading to the Vimana. His paintings often focus on close-up views of these gopurams, reducing their grandeur to a more intimate human scale of perception. In 1949, he designed the emblem for the government of Madras, later the government of Tamil Nadu, featuring the Sriviliputtur Gopuram as its central motif. For students who came to Madras School from a cosmopolitan background, the nuances of hybridity was easier to grasp. For those from rural background with little exposure to modernity, it often became an impediment. Mukaya and Perumal, who came from southern interiors of Tamil Nadu, with their rich rural traditions, would have found Madras School a completely different experience. But by 1950s, Dhanapal had already turned his attention to folk arts. Their imagery, techniques, and material, and the freshness they brought to the artistic vocabulary of the time, offered new insights and possibilities. The works of Italian sculptor Marino Marini was a major source of inspiration for Mukaya, through whom the focus began to shift from Western European art to other centers within Europe. Themes such as Jallikattu, Karagattam, folk deities, and votive animal figures were transformed into expressions of movement, rhythm, and space. Perumal. Perumal's painting, on the other hand, encompassed vast spaces filled with people, often depicting the communal life of villages. His use of flat colors and rough brushworks lends a natural, spontaneous quality in his works. We will reserve Santanraj and Munuswamy for a later lecture. Although both studied in the late 40s and early 50s, the influence of their work and teaching became more prominent during the 1970s and 80s. And this work by Santanraj, it's called The Prodigal Son. He made it in 1962. We can place this one as the finest drawing of the Madras Art Movement. The biblical story of the prodigal son, in which the son goes astray, later realizes his mistake, repents, and returns to his father for forgiveness, is reimagined by Santan Raj. He internalizes the narrative, transforming it into an Indian myth, using Pallava bas relief sculptures as a vehicle to envision the story. Executed in pen, ink, and wash on a blotting paper, the work reflects the ingenuity of third world artists who could turn seemingly simple materials into something extraordinary. The riddle of the prodigal son is something we'll return to in our next lecture. These are some of Santan Raj's later works, and he made it in the 90s and 2000s. So maybe we can look at this in the last lecture. And this is oil on canvas, and you have, and he usually uses sketch pens to do on paper. So this is sketch on paper. These are L. Munuswamy's studies work. Move on to L. Munuswamy's study works. To give an idea of the freedom with which he approaches the subject. It gives an idea of the transition from tentative steps to modernity. Now the self-confidence of the artist is quite evident. I have one video of Munuswamy taken much later, maybe in the 90s. It would be interesting to see it.
Acrylic used directly with water and acrylic used with a medium differs. But I use it with water and very fluid and flowing liquid technique. I have to do it because I have to see the result at once. I can't be working over and over on the canvas, which most artists prefer to do. Beauty is art, and beauty can be found anywhere, not necessarily down here or anywhere in India, everywhere. Not necessarily in a garden of flowers. It can be seen perhaps in a graveyard. Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. The philosophy of life and the philosophy of my work is not two different aspects of my life. It is one and the same. I've taken life and philosophy in one solid, compact unit.
The Madras Art School usually attracted students from within the Madras Presidency, but it also drew a few from outside. Pradosh Das Gupta, Gopal Ghosh, and Paritosh Sen in the 1930s, Dashrath Patel in the 1940s are notable examples. I have chosen to mention them because they did not remain in Madras. Instead, they observed the school's spirit and went on to reinterpret these ideas. Pradosh Das Gupta became one of India's leading modern sculptors. From 1934 to 1937, he trained at the Madras School of Arts under Roy Chowdhury. He later continued his studies at the Royal College of Art, London. He co-founded the Calcutta group of painters and sculptors in 1943. He later taught as a professor of sculpture at the Government College of Arts and Crafts, Calcutta, and served as the director of the National Gallery of Modern Art, New Delhi. He completely develops because he goes to Royal College of Art and then this, but then he blends a Western modernity influenced by Rodin, Brancusi, and Henry Moore, and by using Indian themes. So one is called the Cradle, Sun Worshippers, and the Broken Idol. Dashrath Patel. Dashrath Patel's artistic foundation were laid in the Government College of Fine Arts, Madras, where he studied under Roy Chowdhury in the late 1940s and early 50s. The pedagogical approach of the Madras School was grounded in rigorous academic training and drawing from life. The emphasis on drawing from life, studying proportion, and understanding material property fostered in him a tactile awareness that would later define both his artistic and pedagogical practice. After graduating with distinction in 1953, Patel pursued further studies in Paris, and during this period he met and developed a friendship with the photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson. Later he became one of the first faculty members of National School of Design. At NID he established the ceramic design department, translating the discipline and the material awareness of his Madras education into a new interdisciplinary framework. His teaching integrated craft with the modernist experimentation of Western European art, resulting in a unique Indian design language. The Madras School of Art, therefore, was not merely Dashrath's starting point, but a continuous undercurrent in his practice. Dashrath's career exemplified how the Madras School legacy extended beyond the painting and sculpture to inform the philosophy of design in post-independence India. These are some of Dashrath's photograph of Anna's funeral in Chennai. So he's taken some, and this was published recently, I think, in Frontline. So these are really excellent photographs of him. Thanks, that's it. I think the next talk we will cover the Madras Art Movement. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks.